I thought it might be interesting to have a look at how you can structure your speech if you're taking it from a report or from a book or some other format that is already written out in a particular way. So let's say that we are looking at translating, for want of a better word, your speech from, or your presentation from a written document. So the title of the report, the author's name, the position and the background becomes the introduction to the speaker. So the speaker is introduced with the title, the subject matter of the speech or the presentation, and some background information where appropriate. Now in the next session, where I look at creating a great first impression, I'm going to talk to you about how you have an introduction that is appropriate for whatever kind of presentation you're going to give, but more of that in the next session. So something else you might have is a table of contents. And what does that become in your speech? This is where you tell the audience what you're going to talk about. It's giving them a roadmap to follow during your presentation. Charts and tables. This is where we might fall into the trap of using too much PowerPoint or Keynote. But what other ways can you present charts and tables? You can do it with a whiteboard, you can do it with butcher's paper where you actually draw it and do a live demonstration of what this looks like. I will caution you here about using pie charts. There's a great little graphic that goes around the internet every so often that depicts a pie chart, and actually when you look at it, it is the sky and the sun shining on one side of the pyramid and the shadow on the other side of the pyramid. And every time I see a pie chart, I think of that particular graphic. So be careful about the images that you use or the charts and the tables that you use. Make sure that they cannot be misinterpreted. Underlined words, words in boldface or exclamation marks. How do you emphasize these things when they're written down rather than when you're giving a presentation? So you might write the words on a whiteboard or on butcher's paper, just a single word, linger over them or repeat the words and use appropriate hand gestures for emphasis of those particular words. And so when you're writing your speech, beside the word you would put something that says write this down on the whiteboard, or repeat this, or some other indication of a hand gesture that you might want to use for emphasis at that particular point. And those sorts of notes I think it's important to have within your written speech so that when you refer back to them as you're going through your speech, you remember that that's what you wanted to do. Photographs. Here you paint the picture for them. You tell them a story or an anecdote that builds up a word picture for those that are listening so that they can get a visual sense of what you're talking about. Paragraphs, very easy. You pause for a few seconds between each separate section or idea in your presentation, and we're going to talk a lot about pauses as we go through this particular training. If you've got a list of items in alphabetical, numerical or bulleted order, the best way to present that in a speech or a presentation is to count off the items in order to help the audience stay on track to follow the progress of what you're talking about. Again, it comes back to this roadmap of letting the audience know where you are and where you're going. Chapter headings. Say something like, now I'm going to talk about X. So you introduce the idea of this is another part of the presentation separate to the last lot that you've talked about. Quotation marks. Here you can say something like, as so-and-so once said, or you use the words quote unquote, but don't make the air signs with your fingers as though you're making quotation marks in the air. It's very distracting for people and it's a little bit condescending, I think, in any presentation. Page numbers. Let the audience know where you are in the speech or the presentation. Revisit the roadmap. Go back and remind them of what you said you were going to tell them and how far you are into the presentation itself. Names or other identification can be quite confusing for people if they've got to listen to a presentation and it's something that you're not repeating too often, because when you read something and you don't understand a name, or you don't understand where this particular name or identification fits into the whole of the thing that you're reading about, you can go back a page or so and get your place again. So in terms of a speech and writing your speech, you refer to people, places and things by the same name each time, so that it's clear to what or to whom you are referring. And this is where you do not use acronyms, you don't shorten it, you don't use jargon, you don't use your nicknames, all of those things that confuse people when they're trying to follow who you're talking about, where you're talking about, or what you're talking about. And you refer back. So X works in the same way as Y, which I talked about earlier. Now, conclusions. Summarise, and possibly you could start with in conclusion, but that's a bit of a formal ending. But also the conclusion can be telegraphed by the tone of your voice. Make your final sentence strong, a call to action or a visionary statement. The last thing you say should be the strongest thing you say, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later.